Why can't you sit in a waiting room for 5 minutes without reaching for your phone? It's not weakness. It's not your fault. It's design. Someone engineered this inability into you, and they did it with the precision of a safecracker working a vault. The difference is, they didn't break in. They rewired the lock so you'd never know you were trapped. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. The blueprint for this trap was drawn up almost a century ago, in the dust and desperation of the Great Depression, when men in wool suits discovered something darker than any stock market crash. They discovered that human restlessness could be bottled, sold, and turned into the most profitable resource on Earth. This is the story of how boredom died, how we killed it, and why the people who murdered it got rich beyond the fever dreams of kings. Let me paint you a picture. It's a Tuesday afternoon in 1933. You're sitting on a bench in Central Park. You have nothing to do for the next hour. No phone, no screen. No earbuds pumping manufactured sound into your skull. Just you and the sky and the slow crawl of clouds overhead. What happens? You sit there. You watch people. You think, maybe you get bored. Maybe your mind wanders to that conversation you had last week, or the job you lost, or the woman who doesn't love you anymore. Maybe you stare at a tree until you notice the way the light hits the leaves. Maybe you do absolutely nothing and feel perfectly fine about it. Now try that same experiment today. 60 seconds into that bench, your hand is twitching. 90 seconds, you're checking your pocket. 2 minutes, you're pulling out the phone. Not because you need to, but because the silence feels like drowning. The emptiness feels like death. You've been conditioned to interpret the absence of stimulation as a form of suffering, and somewhere in a boardroom lined with expensive wood paneling, someone is counting the money that conditioning generates. This isn't a sermon about phones being bad. This is a murder investigation. The victim is your ability to exist without external input. The weapon is a sophisticated system of psychological manipulation that spans nearly 100 years, and the killers left their fingerprints all over the crime scene. We just forgot how to read them. The story starts where all good American nightmares start, with the realization that the economy doesn't run on production anymore. It runs on consumption. And consumption has a problem. It's finite. A man only needs so many shoes. A family only needs so much furniture. The refrigerator lasts 10 years. The car lasts 15. If people only bought what they needed, if they saved their money and waited until things actually broke before replacing them, the whole beautiful machine would grind to a halt. The factories would go silent. The shareholders would panic. The system would collapse under the weight of its own efficiency. So in the 1920s and 30s, a new kind of professional emerged. Not a salesman, not an advertiser, something more dangerous. A desire engineer. These were men who understood that the product didn't matter. What mattered was creating a permanent state of wanting. They studied psychology. They read Freud. They understood that human beings could be programmed, that you could create artificial needs as powerful as hunger or thirst if you knew which buttons to press. And the biggest button, the one that opened every wallet in America, was the fear of being left alone with yourself. Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, didn't sell products. He sold insecurity. He made women smoke cigarettes by calling them torches of freedom. He made Americans eat bacon for breakfast by convincing them it was patriotic. But his real genius wasn't in what he sold. It was in what he understood about the human mind. He understood that people don't want things. They want to escape the feeling of not having things. They want to fill a void. And if you can make that void permanent, if you can ensure it never gets filled no matter how much they consume, you've created a customer for life. The Great Depression should have killed this. When people are lining up for bread, they don't care about cigarettes or bacon or the latest fashion. They care about survival. But something strange happened. The advertising industry didn't shrink during the Depression. It metastasized. It evolved. Because the men running it realized something that would shape the next century of American life. Desperation makes people more suggestible, not less. A man with nothing is more likely to dream about having everything. A woman standing in a breadline is more likely to stare at magazine ads showing the life she'll never have. Poverty doesn't kill desire, it weaponizes it. And so the infrastructure was built. Radio became the delivery system for a new kind of programming, and I mean that in both senses of the word. The shows were free. The entertainment was free. All you had to do was let the commercials into your living room. Let them sit with your family. Let them whisper in your children's ears about everything you didn't have and should want. By 1935, the average American family was listening to more than 4 hours of radio per day. 4 hours of someone else's voice telling them stories, selling them dreams, making sure they never had to sit in silence with their own thoughts. But radio was just the beginning. The real transformation came after World War II, when the soldiers came home and the factories that had been making tanks and bombers needed something else to produce. The American economy was a war machine that had just won the war, and now it needed a new enemy. That enemy became free time, leisure, boredom, the empty hours when a person might sit on their porch and realize they already had enough. Enter television. 1948. The weapon goes mainstream. Within 5 years, half of American households have a television set. Within 10 years, it's 90%. And here's what nobody talks about when they romanticize the 1950s. Those families gathered around the TV set, smiling in the blue glow, living the American dream. They weren't watching television. Television was watching them. It was studying them, learning their rhythms, figuring out exactly how long a human being could pay attention before needing another hit of stimulation. The commercial break wasn't a bug. It was the whole point. The shows were just bait to keep you in the chair while they rewired your expectations about what normal consciousness should feel like. A human being in 1930 could sit on a porch for an hour and feel fine. A human being in 1960 started feeling twitchy after 15 minutes. The tolerance was building. The addiction was taking root. And the beautiful part, from the system's perspective, was that nobody called it an addiction. They called it progress. They called it modern life. They called it entertainment. The men engineering this understood something that wouldn't become public knowledge for decades. The human brain releases dopamine not when you get what you want, but in anticipation of getting what you want. The pleasure isn't in the reward, it's in the hunt. And if you can keep someone in a permanent state of hunting, if you can train their brain to expect constant stimulation and never quite deliver satisfaction, you've created the perfect consumer. Always chasing, never catching, always empty, always buying. This is why the stores started staying open later, why shopping became a leisure activity instead of a chore, why the mall became the new town square, the new church, the new center of American social life. By the 1970s, shopping wasn't something you did when you needed something. It was something you did when you were bored, when you felt empty, when you needed to feel something, anything. Even if that something was just the brief chemical reward of purchasing an object you didn't need, with money you didn't have. The credit card accelerated everything. Before 1950, consumer debt barely existed. You saved money and bought things. If you couldn't afford it, you waited. The idea of borrowing money to buy a dress or a television would have seemed insane, almost immoral. But by 1960, consumer credit was everywhere. And it came with a promise. You don't have to wait. You don't have to sit with the discomfort of wanting something and not having it. You can have it now. You can fill that void immediately. Just sign here. We'll worry about payment later. What they didn't tell you is that the payment never ends. Not because of the interest, although that's part of it, but because the void never fills. The dress doesn't make you happy. The television doesn't make you complete. You sit with your new purchase for a day, maybe a week, and then the emptiness comes back stronger than before, because now you've trained your brain that the solution to emptiness is acquisition. And so you buy again, and again, and the debt grows, and the emptiness grows, and somewhere, someone you've never met is getting very, very rich from your suffering. By the 1980s, the system had perfected itself. Shopping channels on television, 24 hours a day. You could buy things at 3 in the morning without leaving your couch. You could call a number on the screen and have something shipped to your house. Something you didn't know existed 5 minutes ago, but now desperately needed because a woman with perfect teeth smiled and told you it would change your life. The friction was gone. The pause between wanting and having, that sacred space where you might ask yourself if you actually need this thing, had been eliminated. Desire became instant. Gratification became immediate. And your ability to sit with discomfort, to tolerate boredom, to exist in the space between stimulus and response, atrophied like a muscle you forgot you had. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the 1930s, because that's when the philosophy behind all this was articulated clearly for the first time. A retail analyst named Victor Lebo wrote something in 1955 that should be carved into the side of every shopping mall in America. He said, "We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing rate." He said this explicitly, out loud, in print. This wasn't a conspiracy theory. This was the stated goal of the American economic system. Waste as virtue, dissatisfaction as policy. Your inability to be content as the foundation of prosperity. Think about what that means. The system doesn't want you to be happy. It can't afford for you to be happy. A happy person stops buying things they don't need. A content person sits under a tree and feels fine about it. A satisfied person is an economic failure, a drag on growth, a threat to quarterly earnings. And so the entire apparatus of modern life, from the commercials to the credit cards to the dopamine-optimized apps on your phone, exists to ensure you never feel satisfied. Ever. For even a moment. The internet was supposed to liberate us. That's what they said in the 1990s. Information wants to be free. The old gatekeepers are dying. We'll build a new world of connection and knowledge. And for about 5 minutes, maybe that was true. But then the same people who sold cigarettes and bacon and television sets realized something. The internet wasn't a library. It was the most sophisticated delivery system for advertising ever invented. And better yet, it was bidirectional. The television watched you by proxy, by studying aggregate ratings and demographics. The internet watches you directly. It knows what you click, what you read, how long you linger, what makes you angry, horny, afraid, jealous. It builds a profile more accurate than anything your mother knows about you, and then it sells that profile to the highest bidder. The phone in your pocket isn't a tool. It's a slot machine that follows you everywhere. Every app is designed by teams of engineers whose entire job is to make you check it more often. They A/B test the color of the notification dot. They hire psychologists to figure out the optimal interval for delivering rewards. They use the same techniques casinos use, the same mechanisms that create gambling addicts, and they aim it at your brain 24 hours a day. And when you try to quit, when you try to put the phone down and sit in silence for 5 minutes, your brain screams at you because it's been trained to interpret the absence of stimulation as physical pain. This is what I mean when I say boredom was murdered. It didn't die naturally. It was killed, systematically, over decades, by people who understood that a bored person is a useless person, economically speaking. A bored person might think, might question, might realize they don't need half the garbage cluttering their house. might sit on a bench in the park and feel perfectly fine about it, might stop generating revenue for someone else. The 1930s taught us something we've spent 90 years trying to forget, that the human animal is designed to tolerate enormous amounts of nothing, that silence is not suffering, that an empty afternoon is not a crisis, that you can sit with yourself, with the slow tick of time, with the vast, boring infinity of existence, and be okay. More than okay, whole, complete, free in a way that no product can ever make you free. The people who lived through the Depression knew this because they had to. When you're worried about eating, you don't worry about being entertained. When survival is the question, boredom isn't a problem. It's a luxury. You sit on the porch because there's nowhere else to go. You talk to your neighbor because there's nothing else to do. You stare at the horizon because the horizon is free, and somewhere in that enforced stillness, in that poverty of distraction, you discover something the modern world has worked very hard to hide from you, that you are enough, that existence itself, unadorned and unmediated, is sufficient. This terrifies the system, because the system needs you to feel insufficient. It needs you to feel like something is missing. It needs you to believe that the hole inside you can be filled with products, with content, with the next thing and the next thing and the next thing forever, if you ever stopped. If you ever sat down and felt complete without buying anything, the entire apparatus would collapse. So what do you do with this information? How do you fight a system that's been optimized over a century to infiltrate your nervous system? You can't boycott it. You can't unplug completely, not if you want to function in the modern world. The prison is invisible and everywhere. The bars are in your head. Here's the secret the 1930s understood and we forgot. Boredom is a muscle, the ability to sit still, to tolerate the absence of stimulation, to be alone with your thoughts without reaching for a distraction. That's not a given. It's a skill. And like any skill, it atrophies when you don't use it. Every time you pull out your phone to avoid 5 seconds of silence, you're making the muscle weaker. Every time you fill the empty space with noise, with shopping, with scrolling, you're training your brain that emptiness is intolerable. You're doing the system's work for it. So you practice. You sit on a bench with no phone. You take a walk with no earbuds. You spend an evening with no television, no internet, no input except your own thoughts. And it feels terrible at first. Your brain will scream. It will tell you this is pointless, that you're wasting time, that you should be doing something productive. That voice is not your voice. That's the voice of 100 years of conditioning. That's the voice of every advertiser who ever needed you to feel insufficient. You acknowledge it, you let it scream, you sit there anyway. And gradually, slowly, the muscle rebuilds. You start to notice things, the way light moves through leaves, the rhythm of your own breathing, the strange thoughts that emerge when you're not constantly interrupting them with external input. You remember what the people in the 1930s knew by necessity and we've forgotten by design. That consciousness itself, the simple act of being aware and alive, is enough. It's always been enough. Everything else is just noise designed to make you forget that. The system will tell you this is regression, that you're going backward. That progress means more stimulation, more connectivity, more content, more, until the day you die with a screen in your hand. But progress toward what? Toward a life where you can't sit in silence for 5 minutes without feeling like you're dying? Toward an existence that requires constant external input to feel bearable? Toward a world where the average person is so addicted to distraction they've forgotten what their own thoughts sound like? That's not progress. That's capture. That's defeat dressed up in the language of innovation. The real rebellion isn't political. It's not buying the right products or supporting the right causes. It's simpler and more radical than that. It's sitting still. It's being bored. It's reclaiming the empty spaces that the system has worked so hard to colonize. Every moment you spend not consuming is a moment you're not generating value for someone else. Every hour you spend in silence is an hour you're not being programmed. Every day you practice tolerating boredom is a day you're breaking the conditioning that's been imposed on you since birth. They killed boredom because boredom was dangerous. A bored person asks questions. A person with time to think might notice that the emperor has no clothes, that the system is a con, that the entire edifice of modern consumer capitalism rests on keeping you perpetually dissatisfied. They can't have that. So they filled every silence with noise, every empty moment with stimulus, every pause with panic. Your job, if you want to be free, is to find the silence again, to sit with the boredom, to tolerate the emptiness until you realize it was never empty at all. The void you've been trying to fill with products and content and distraction is not a void. It's you. It's consciousness. It's the raw material of being human. And it's the one thing they can never sell you because you already have it. You've always had it. The men in the wool suits from 1930 knew this truth and spent their careers burying it. The question is whether you're brave enough to dig it back up.